Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the rich, incredibly complex, and deeply fascinating history of Japan. To really grasp it, I want you to picture Japan's history as a massive pendulum. You see, it's a nation that has constantly swung back and forth between periods of intense, lockdown isolation and eras of rapidly absorbing incredible amounts of outside influence. It's an amazing story of resilience, and understanding this pendulum swing is absolutely crucial to understanding the Japan we know today, from the tech in your pocket to the media you consume.
Okay, let's dive into this. 15%. It's kind of hard to believe, but less than 15% of Japan's fiercely volcanic and mountainous landscape is actually arable, agricultural land. The rest of it? It's just covered in rugged mountains and dense forests, and constantly subjected to earthquakes and typhoons.
To put that into perspective, picture the state of California. Got it? Now, imagine squeezing literally 4 times the population into that exact same space. That intense geographic density, combined with the sheer isolation of being an island nation entirely cut off by the sea, well, it forced the Japanese people to create an incredibly resilient, cooperative, and highly unique culture just to survive.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll be tracing this evolution across 6 defining eras: geography and early origins, the classical imperial court, the rise of the samurai, the Edo period isolation, rapid modernization and empire, and finally, the post-war economic miracle.
All right, Chapter 1, Geography and Early Origins. Let's move to and see how this builds. Human occupation here goes back tens of thousands of years, but things really kick off with the Jomon period around 14,000 BCE. They were hunter-gatherers, really famous for their unique pottery. Then, around 300 BCE, the Yayoi period brings a massive shift. Wet rice cultivation and metallurgy arrive from the Asian continent. By the time we hit the Asuka and Nara periods in the 6th and 8th centuries, the pendulum has swung way out. Japan is vigorously absorbing Chinese influence, from Buddhism to writing systems, and even mimicking Chinese government administration. Moving right along to Chapter 2, the classical imperial court.
In 794, the capital moved to Heian-ko, which is modern-day Kyoto. What's really interesting about this era is that it was a monumental turning point where Japan stopped merely copying China and began forging its own distinct national identity. Chinese influence deliberately faded, and a native Japanese culture just flourished. We see the birth of incredible literature, like The Tale of Genji, written by a noblewoman, featuring really complex themes and melodramatic plots. The court nobles became entirely consumed with poetry, beauty, and aesthetic refinement. They isolated themselves in their sophisticated world, which, ironically, left them incredibly vulnerable to the increasingly powerful military clans in the outer provinces.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, Rise of the Samurai.
That vulnerability at court triggered a massive shift. The pendulum violently swung from the cultured imperial court to an era dominated by iron and violent civil war. To understand this era, we need to clearly define 2 crucial terms. First, the shogun. Starting around 1185 with Minamoto no Yoritomo, the shogun became the supreme military dictator of Japan. Second, the daimyo. These were the powerful regional feudal lords who commanded the samurai and ran massive private armies. Together, they formed the bakufu, basically a military tent government, which effectively took over running the entire country.
Now, this created an absolutely fascinating dynamic friction. On one side, you have the emperor, living in Kyoto. He was revered as a divine figurehead and the cultural leader, but he had virtually zero actual authority. On the other side, you have the shogun. While nominally appointed by the emperor, the shogun pulled the actual political strings and controlled the military. The sword, not the poem, now ruled Japan.
Chapter 4, the Edo period isolation.
After centuries of bloody civil war, the Tokugawa shogunate finally unified the nation and locked the pendulum into strict isolation. But here's the thing. This prolonged period of internal peace allowed culture to evolve profoundly. Old pond, frog jumps in, water sound, exquisite, delicate art forms, like this famous haiku by Matsuo Basho, deeply flourished. Without external wars to fight, Japanese culture had the breathing room to refine its unique aesthetic of simplicity and complex beauty.
But beneath this peaceful surface, society was shifting. Despite strict seclusion policies, the capital, Edo, became the largest city in the Far East. So the crucial point is this: while the samurai were officially the highest ruling class, they were increasingly falling into serious debt. Actually, scratch that. It was the lower-class merchants, the ones supplying bustling urban centers like Edo and Osaka, who were quietly amassing immense wealth and driving a vibrant, energetic new urban street culture.
So, what does this all mean? We arrive at a massive narrative hinge.
The society is isolated, structurally strained, with merchants holding all the wealth and samurai holding the empty titles. How does an isolated, completely feudal society suddenly become a modern global empire? Well, the answer arrives in the form of American warships, heavily armed and demanding open trade.
Chapter 5. Rapid Modernization and Empire. Talk about a shock to the system. The arrival of those Western warships forced the pendulum to violently swing back outward. Japan quickly realized it had to absorb Western technology immediately, or risk being colonized just like its neighbors. This triggers the Meiji Restoration of 1868. The reforms were staggering. The centuries-old feudal class system of the samurai completely abolished. Regional domains were wiped out and replaced with a centralized system of modern prefectures. Japan systematically integrated Western technology, railways, and military structures while simultaneously reinstating the emperor not just as a figurehead, but as the absolute sacred center of political power.
This incredibly swift industrialization and modernization fueled a new era for Japan as a formidable global power. They rapidly expanded their military empire across East Asia. This aggressive territorial expansion ultimately culminated in the immense tragedy, conflict, and sheer destruction of the Second World War. Following atomic bombings and massive structural devastation, Japan faced its ultimate defeat and surrendered, an event that profoundly and permanently reshaped the trajectory of the entire nation.
And that brings us to Chapter 6, Post-War Economic Miracle. From the ashes of that destruction, Japan had to completely reinvent itself. Stripped of their military might, they pivoted their immense national discipline entirely toward economic and technological growth. The strategy they used was highly structured. First, they established rigorous universal compulsory education, ensuring a highly literate and capable workforce. Second, they implemented open market labor policies, uniquely treating white-collar enterprises and business personnel as incredibly valuable national assets. And third, they aggressively pivoted into high-tech manufacturing. They didn't just rebuild, they innovated. The results of that strategic focus were absolutely staggering. Post-World War II, Japan's global patent applications literally skyrocketed, past the United Kingdom, and heavily challenged the United States. They completely dominated global innovation in emerging fields. Think televisions, video recorders, and sophisticated semiconductors. They transformed themselves from a devastated, defeated nation into the second-largest economy in the world. A real game changer. They became a true global powerhouse of both technology and culture.
Which leaves us looking at Japan today. We've seen the pendulum swing from the isolated Jomon to the outward-looking Nara, back to the isolated Edo, out to the expanding Meiji, and into the global economic powerhouse of the late 20th century. So, I leave you with this question. Has Japan's historical pendulum of isolation and global influence finally settled into a steady balance for the 21st century? Or, as global dynamics shift once again, is it quietly preparing for another massive swing? Keep exploring the deep historical currents of this incredible nation to find out. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.